the thrill of the organ, the smell of the popcorn, the eager anticipation of the feature presentation. If you head to the movies in the UK, there's a 1 in 3 chance you'll end up here. Well, not specifically here, but in a building like this. From humble Brummie beginnings, Odeon's gone on to be the home of British cinema going for 4 generations. So sit back, tell the woman next to you to pipe down, grab your popcorn, and enjoy the rags to riches story of Odeon. I'm here outside what the Hollywood elite call the Cathedral. It's seen them all, this place. Serena McKellen, Bubble from Big Brother. Tom Cruise was here 3 years ago for a walkabout and he's still here now. But despite the glitz and glamour of Odeon's flagship cinema, the origins lie far away from London's glittering West End. Our story starts in 1930 when pioneering entrepreneur Oscar Deutsch opened the first Odeon in Birmingham. But Oscar's origins weren't quite as glamorous as his future venture.
My father was born in 1893 in Birmingham. He was an only child, and he eventually went into his own father's scrap metal business and did quite well there. And that formed a basis of security to go into the movie industry.
The first Odeon was actually at Perry Barr. It was originally going to be called the Picture House, but as it happened, there was another cinema of the same name in the area. Deutsch and his fellow directors had to come up with something else.
Odeon is the name for an amphitheatre at the Acropolis near Athens. And fortunately, he could actually find a nice acronym for it. Oscar Deutsch entertains our nation.
These new Odeons really pushed the existing cinemas into a second-run category. That they became the flea pits when these new buildings appeared.
While these new buildings might have been luxurious, Oscar wasn't 100% happy with their design. And so, in 1934, as he prepared for a new, ambitious project in his hometown, Oscar approached friend and neighbour Harry Whedon, an architect who oversaw the vast majority of subsequent Odeon cinema buildings, including the flagship in Leicester Square. The architecture itself was Odeon's marketing. It was the best advertising money could buy because it was there every day in bricks and mortar. And with me, Ron Wilde, who I've met today, who knew the original architect.
That's correct, yes. I did know Harry very well.
Harry Whedon.
Harry Whedon, that's right.
What did he do for Odeon?
Harry was a great innovator. Previously to this, cinemas were in old garages, agricultural halls and so on. And what he wanted to do was to create an image that could be immediately recognised by when you're driving down the street, you would recognise this particular feature. And most of the cinemas had a vertical tower. And of course, there would be a very large canopy in front of the cinema. So you had a vertical feature and a horizontal feature.
In what way, then, did this building make the Odeon brand?
I think it was probably a combination of many things. The building certainly contributed towards it, but Lily, that's Oscar's wife, had a big impact in what materials were used inside. She was quite keen on colours and fabrics and that sort of thing, and she was involved in most of the Odeon cinemas throughout the building programme in the 30s.
How much does Odeon today owe to the buildings that it first had?
Well, I think they do owe a lot to the original concept, and I think it's a link with the past into the future.
Are you proud to have known Harry Whedon?
Yes, I am very proud of him. He was an extremely nice man.
Whedon's sleek, stylish Art Deco creations embodied the spirit of the times and brought a touch of Hollywood glamour to often drab and depressed urban areas. 7 decades on, their glamour hasn't faded, and many are now listed buildings and part and parcel of Odeon's enduring appeal. The thing about the Odeon was that it wasn't just a place to go and see a movie. It was a place where people from all walks of life could go escape the daily grind and enjoy a bit of escapism.
People were now starting to suffer from unemployment, all kinds of things that were affecting our social society.
Here was a place in the town that had luxury. It was a picture palace. There was nothing like it. There were lots of other cinemas, some of the Granada circuit, ABC circuit, Gilmont British circuit. Very big, very charming, but none of them as luxurious.
There are stories, particularly in poorer areas, of people going in and walking on carpet for the first time and being amazed at the fittings in the toilets and all this kind of thing, and even staying there all day just to keep warm.
This was a place where they could go to and forget their sadness.
Odeons weren't just a source of entertainment, they were a source of employment. During the 1930s, coming out of a harsh depression, they were one of the few industries that was booming. Building on Glasgow's Renfield Street, for example, was like taking a darkened room and flooding it with light.
My father provided building work which was so scarce for hundreds, maybe thousands of people.
Until war stopped things in 1939, they opened 138 completely new cinemas and took over almost as many and applied the Odeon name to them as well.
At one time, they were building 2 Odeons a week. This went on for about 4 or 5 years. So that's a massive, massive building program.
Now, it wasn't really just about employment, nor was it just about rampant escapism, and it wasn't just about action on the screen. Odeon, for generations, was about action on the love seat as well. Oh, give her a kiss. Go on.
The back rows of the stalls were always 2-seaters. And this is another advantage, of course, of the cinema, that it was a great place to take your girlfriend and have a bit of time alone.
It was a sort of very affordable way of going out and getting away from the parents and into a dark environment where you could get up to a certain amount, but the usherettes kept an eye on things.
They used to shine the torches along the roads to see nothing was going on that shouldn't be going on.
As war broke out, the Odeon Cinemas became both a refuge and a target.
Cinemas were considered safe havens, basically. If there's an air raid, you had the choice of staying and watching the show or leaving. These are very strong buildings and probably the safest place to be above ground.
During the war, it wasn't an Odeon cinema, it was a private independent cinema that I was actually in when a rocket exploded above and a huge cylinder, like an oxygen cylinder, came through the roof and landed right in the gangway of a packed cinema.
A few Odeons that were struck, most notably one in Kemp Town, where a bomb fell in the front stalls on a Saturday afternoon, where many children, unfortunately, were there. In total, about 55 people were killed during that incident. But Odeons also had a role, like other cinemas, through bringing war news onto the screen. And of course, there's always a chance you might see somebody you knew rolling around in a tank in Africa or somewhere else.
I remember on the newsreel, I was sitting there and my brother was in Burma in the army, and it was showing you their like tanks, I don't know what they called them, going over the water into land, and my brother was on it. I left the cinema to run home and tell me mum.
In spite of the bombings and the hardship, the war had been a boom time for cinema, with a distinct duopoly emerging, Odeon and long-time rival ABC. But having weathered the war, both now had to face a new and deadlier enemy.
In 1946, people were going to the cinema on average once a week in Britain, and then by 40 years later, that had gone down to once a year, so it had gone down to a 50th. And in that time, of course, the big thing that happened is television.
The Odeon circuit began to suffer from the effects of television, particularly the arrival of ITV, which was deliberately more popular in its programming than the BBC had been.
So what they started doing was closing them down, turning them into bingo halls, turning them into dance halls. Their cinema portfolio went down from several hundred in the 1940s to something like 75 by the mid-80s.
In the 1970s, there was something of a turning point, really, with the arrival of blockbusters like Jaws and Star Wars. And then a few years later, as more and more homes started installing those natty VHS video players, the passion for cinema going itself was reignited.
What video did was it educated a whole new generation of film fans. It turned people into, millions and millions of young people into real film fans.
But just as Odeon was finding its feet, it was caught off guard by a cinematic revolution.
The turning point for cinema in Britain really happened in 1985, the opening of the very first multiplex in the UK, The Point, in Milton Keynes. And that was, I guess, initially seen as a bit of a threat.
Odeon traditionally had been 2, 3, 4 screen cinemas in core city centre locations, and Odeon had to make some very, very difficult decisions very quickly.
The general strategy has been, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em. While it draws a lot of its identity and success from its glorious heritage, Odeon's also realised that a new generation of moviegoers loves the multiplex and has even gone as far as gobbling up a multiplex chain in the form of UCI as well as arch-rival ABC. But it still has some pretty stiff competition to see off.
Odeon's chief rivals today are the View Cinemas and also Cineworld, and to a lesser degree Showcase. What's been very interesting over the last, 20 years with the huge multiplex boom is there's been this bewildering flurry of different brand names coming and going. Throughout all that time, Odeon has always been there like this kind of beacon, a beacon of heritage.
So despite the Nazis, TV and the multiplexes, Odeon still remains the dominant name in British cinema going. So just what is it about the Odeon that keeps us Brits coming back for more?